So good evening and welcome to Slooh. I'm Helen Avery and this is Constellation Stories, and I'm here for the next, well, we'll see. And tonight we're looking at Ursa Major, which is really exciting. Rather we're going to be talking about Ursa Major rather than looking at it, because unfortunately, especially given the telescopes have been open all week, it's been phenomenal. But the Canaries are closed tonight. They're having really bad weather. And in fact, if you are on the main page, I'm just pulling it up now, just to check everything's good and going. You should see, let's have a look. On the Canary All Sky tab, just under it, you will see absolutely nothing. So, in case you ever doubted that I'm not telling the truth, it really is just a whole mess out in the Canaries tonight. And at this time, you couldn't see any of the stars of Ursa Major in Chile. In fact, I'm not even sure you can see them from where our Chilean telescopes are, because Ursa Major is really a northern hemisphere set of stars. I did find today some pictures of the Big Dipper over some mountains in Chile, but I don't know exactly where they were. So my geography is not brilliant enough to tell you whereabouts you may or may not be able to see it, how far down. I know you can see it in the northern hemisphere. So I'm afraid we're just going to be looking at some images that I'm going to put up. I'll try and keep them exciting and sharing some stories, but there are lots and lots of stories around, one of the most well-known constellations, if not the most well-known, certainly in the northern hemisphere. Ursa Major is the most well-known. If you sort of take globally, because Orion can be seen in the southern hemisphere, Orion might win it. But typically, we all kind of know Ursa Major, and it's one of the first ones we learn as a child, again in the northern hemisphere probably. So I've got some Greek tales, classic Greek tales. We've got some Native American tales this evening. We've got poems and lullabies and a whole lot of things happening. As I say, I'm going to be putting up some images just to keep it fresh. So here we go. Here's the first image. Right. So this, as you probably recognise, is a painting by Vincent van Gogh. And there in the sky above, we can see the stars we're probably most familiar with when we think about Ursa Major. And this is the asterism, also known as the Big Dipper or the plow. And we'll talk a bit about that specifically later and where those names came from. But it's such a familiar sight in our sky that it's sort of seeped into everything, all of our culture really in the northern hemisphere. Even obviously into paintings like we're looking at now, but poetry, it's always there. It's in the Bible. There was some talk about Arcturus, and then as versions of the Bible became edited, it was thought that maybe Arcturus was wrong, and actually what it was referring to was the bear. So that got changed. But it's in songs and obviously books and dating back thousands of years. This set of stars has been talked about. What do we know about them, though? That is sort of the interesting thing. I put a thing out on Twitter earlier this week to say, one of our most well-known constellations, can you name any of the stars? Kind of crazy, right? I couldn't. I could not name one. I was really embarrassed. And even, I don't know if you saw, we had a Blue Moon show. I can't remember what that was now. But I asked Paul Cox and Dr. Paige Godfrey if they could name one. And even Paige said that she was like, the Alpha Ursa Major star, which, it is. But they actually have their original Arabic names. But on Twitter, it came back like 70% of people whose answered the survey said that they could name at least one, and about 30% said that they couldn't. They were like me, and I just thought, how shocking is that? It's we point up to it all the time and say, oh, there it is, the Big Dipper or the Plow or the Great Bear, and yet we might not know the names. So to start with, I thought before we get into the storytelling, we're going to really get to know at least this asterism. So let's shut this one down. Okay. So just to sort of give you an idea of what the bear looks like, and where the Big Dipper fits into that, you can see here. Looks a bit like a bear, maybe a shrew with a tail, some sort of foxy, stoaty thing. But yes, this is the actual full Ursa Major, and then you can see within that, hopefully, the Big Dipper, which we more commonly look at, this set of 7 stars here. And then let me show you. Yep, here we go. So this is the names of the stars. So if you were like me and you didn't know them, now it's your chance to get to know them. As I said, they're sort of these 7 stars, and they're very well known across the world, across the Northern Hemisphere certainly, and they're often just known as the 7. So in India, they're sometimes seen as 7 bears, these stars, sometimes 7 bulls, but also the 7 holy men who are supposed to live beyond the planets, or 7 sages or 7 poets. In South Korea, rather, they were called the 7 stars of the north. So it's just this kind of like magic 7 number that people focused on, rather than like the whole bear most of the time. So we're going to start with Dubhe. That's over on the right hand side. Dubhe, you'll see there, is the alpha star. So when Bayer came to name these stars, he didn't name them these are the original names. He just kind of went round from east to west and named them alpha, beta would be Merak below, all the way over to the edge of the tail. So they are pretty boring names typically, and don't really reflect what's going on in this asterism, because Dubhe is not the brightest star. Even though it's the alpha, it's the second brightest actually. So we're going to start looking at Dubhe and Merak. So these are known as the keepers, these 2 stars. More often they are called the pointer stars, or as I like to call them, the pointer sisters. And they point to Polaris in the Little Bear in Ursa Minor. Let me see if I can just show you that one. Right, so this looks like a very confusing picture, but maybe you can just sort of take a moment to get your head around it. You'll see the Big Dipper below, and there's this sort of dotted line that points upwards to Polaris, the pole star in Ursa Minor, the small bear. So they, as I say, are known as the pointers, or the pointer sisters. And it's said that in the other direction, if you were to follow them downwards, they point to Regulus. But I had a look on some maps and I couldn't quite make that work. And somewhere between Owl Nebula and Regulus it looked like, but it sort of goes down into the line anyway, if you're looking to orient yourself with these stars in the night sky. But it seems kind of strange. I was thinking about it. I normally start off with, where can we find the constellation? But in the case of the Great Bear, it's normally like we find the Big Dipper first and everything we come from off of that. So we kind of just look around the sky and just find it typically, because it's so obvious when we see it. So it's sort of interesting to think of it as, in fact, I couldn't find any pictures that, or any research that sort of said, and here is how you would locate it in the sky. It was funny. I mean, I know how to locate it, but it just seemed interesting to me that it's like, it goes without saying, we all just look up and we find the Great Bear. So Dubhe, as I said, it's it's not. It is the alpha star, but it's not the brightest. Let's just put you back on the stars. Okay, there we go. And it's a shortened version of it, has a much longer name, and it means the back of the Great Bear. So if you remember in our whole picture, it is literally the back of the Great Bear, more like the shoulder. Fun fact, Dubhe is the official star of the state of Utah. And on a side note, actually the whole of Ursa Major, well, the whole of the Big Dipper and then the pole star are the flag of Alaska. So a real, other than Utah, it's sort of interesting, but there's a big association with the North, which makes more sense for Alaska, being the flag of Alaska. So Dubhe here actually has more in common with Alkaid at the end of the tail. And that's the third brightest star, because the other 5 stars that we see here, and I'll come to Mizar and Alcor in a minute because it might look a bit confusing. That's a binary star, but normally we just think about Mizar. The other stars in this system, so if we say Mizar, Alioth, Megrez, Vector, Merak, they are part of their own cluster. They're part of the same system. So those 5 are about 80 light years away, but Dubhe is 124 light years away, and Alkaid is also in its own system. So it's really only these middle ones and Merak that are linked together, and Dubhe and Alkaid are kind of on their own. And we'll talk about this later because it's really interesting when it comes to the future of this constellation. So those other 5 stars that I talked about that this cluster are like warm class A stars, but Dubhe is a class K giant with a temperature of about 4500 Kelvin. It's also the coolest of all these stars, and it has a slight orange colour. And it's the only one that's evolved and is in this sort of long process of dying, although for now it's kind of stabilised a little bit by the fusion of helium in its core. The other pointer sister, Merak, is the beta, just because that's what Bayer did. It means the loin of the bear. It's more like a greenish white, actually. And I had booked the telescopes to look at these 2 stars tonight. So what I think I'm going to do is run the whole mission again, the hour mission, at one evening this week, when I can find a free slot with the telescopes. So that if you are interested in going and seeing with your own eyes through Slooh's telescopes, the things I might talk about tonight, then you'll be able to do that. And if you actually go onto the community page and click like live casts and constellation stories, you'll see a couple of threads and it will list the missions I had set up for tonight in high hopes of the weather. But I was hoping to really dive into these 2 stars, and we might have seen the difference. One was like orange and Merak that's like a greenish white. So as I mentioned, Merak, Vector, Megrez, Alioth and Mizar and Alcor, they're all part of the same cluster. It's called the Ursa Major cluster. It's also known as Colander 285. It's known as the Ursa Major moving group. And it's thought that they're about 250 to 500 million years old, and the cluster itself sprawls over a line some like 30 light years long by 18. It's enormous, but it's the closest cluster-like object to Earth. So it's kind of amazing. Also in that cluster, interestingly, there are, in that system, there are other stars outside of this constellation. There's one of its closest relatives is actually in Canis Venatici, but then there are stars that seem to be moving in the same direction and sort of having the same origin that are throughout many constellations. So Vector is, it means the thigh of the bear. That also has another name, Phad, P-H-A-D. Then we have Megrez, that's the faintest star, and is thought to mean the root of the great bear's tail. And it's always kind of interesting that this great bear has this really, really long tail. And it's interesting as some of the stories that we'll talk about in a bit kind of try and weave that in to some artistic license happening. Alioth comes next, and that's the brightest star actually in this particular asterism, and indeed the constellation. And it's thought that it comes from a word that meant the fat tail of the sheep. So I guess like the fattest part of the bear's tail would make sense. But there's a lot of all the stars in this particular asterism. That particular star has all different names throughout history. So there's Aliath and Alhaith and Riz Alioth. So there's a lot of kind of meanings for it, really. Then we're going to jump over to the end of the tail, Alkaid. As I mentioned, that's the third brightest. And that is just 10 million years old. That's a B-type main sequence star. And if we were able to see that through the telescopes tonight, we would hopefully see it's kind of a blue-white hue. And I'm going to misquote it, but there is a line in the Bible, as I mentioned, it was talking about Arcturus. It got changed in later versions to refer to the bear with her train. And the train refers to these stars in the tail, just so you knew. But I skipped over Mizar because this is probably the most interesting star, and we were going to take a look at this tonight as well. So it's a really, really well-known double star, and you probably guessed that because you can see their Alcor as well. And you can see it with like a pair of binoculars. So that's why it's like so well known and well loved, because double stars sometimes are very hard to see without a telescope, but you can actually see this with the naked eye, this wonderful double star. And there's a saying, actually, I'm told, of olden days in the Middle East, that you'd say, wow, he can't even see Alcor, meaning like his eyesight is really bad. It's thought to mean, there was not the word Alcor, but a different word, I think it was shu, in Arabic means the lost one. And there's a lot of myth around Alcor. Some even say that it's like one of the lost Pleiades. So, and it has kind of its sort of its own name. Sometimes the two together are called the horse and the rider. And in Germany, it sort of represents this little one, Alcor, represents Hans the Wagoner, who came to assist Jesus. In fact, there are lots of these associations with the wagon saving Jesus connected to Alcor and Mizar. I don't know why, but there's a few of these stories floating around in different countries. So we're looking at this now, Alcor and Mizar, and I did set a mission to it earlier in the week. So did wonderful Carol Botha, and I'm going to use her picture. There it is. Over on the right. Let me see if I can. Here we go. Let's make this a bit more. Oh, sorry. Bear with me. Good Lord. Having one of those days. Right. There we go. Let's keep these there. Great. Okay. So as you can see, the largest star on the right would be Mizar, and the one over to the left and upwards, like at 10 o'clock, that's Alcor. So you can see with a big telescope like Slooh, I mean, you really see there's a big gap between them. But the other interesting thing is that this isn't just two stars. It turns out there are even more stars, because Mizar is actually 4 stars, and Alcor itself is a binary consisting of Alcor A and B. So there are 6 stars in total for this, what we thought was, a double star. Mario informed me this week, one of our members, that they are 3 spectroscopic binaries, meaning they appear to be one star even with a telescope. You have to use a spectrometer to understand that they're, or to work out that they are actually each binary star of their own. So we're looking at, I'm assuming, obviously Mizar and Alcor is those are obvious, and then I'd say that the one kind of in the middle to the under, lower, just a little lower in the middle of them, that would be the third. But yeah, I mean, we wouldn't be able to tell here that each of those was its own binary. So definitely worth going out and having a look with your own eyes to see if you can see the two together, Mizar and Alcor, and then say maybe using a telescope or coming on using Slooh's telescopes to get a real deeper look and see for yourself. So amazing. But enough of, I think that's enough of delving into the stars for now. And I'm certainly out of my league when we're talking about spectrometers and spectroscopic binaries, so I should probably stick to my knitting. And we're going to start with the Greek story. And actually I'm going to share with you the Roman version of the story, because it'll have different names of gods. And there are many variations on this story. And I'm actually going to share one with you that was written for children, so it's very PG, because there are some versions that are not. In fact, if you've ever chanced upon Julius Stahl's book, Patterns in the Sky, it's a really great book, but his versions of all the Greek myths and Roman myths are always like pretty shocking and not always something you can share. So I thought for today I wanted to share with you, it was Denise Vale, Stories of the Stars. It was this lovely book she has for children, but it just was a sweet version, so I thought I would share it with you. So there are bears, and I just wanted to bring up, nope, good lord, there we go. I don't know if I'm going to be able to move that, we'll see. No, I'm just going to leave it. Okay, just leave it alone. Right, and this is one of the lovely illustrations from her book about the two bears together, because the Greek and the Roman myth talk about these two bears as Ursa Major and Ursa Minor as mother and bear cub. And just by the by, we really don't have those stories about bears until the Greeks and the Romans. Like the Egyptians didn't see them as bears. It was a whole different thing happening. And if we have time in a couple of weeks, when I get back from traveling and the stars are still visible, then we can do like a whole nother show, because there's so much to be told. Like the Chinese stories about this constellation are fascinating, the Egyptian. But we're going to stick to bear stories for the most part today. So here we go. Long, long ago, in Greece, the people said these stars made the shape of a big mother bear. They also said there was a little bear in the sky, smaller and less distinct than the mother bear, and he was the big bear's son. How did they get there? The story goes a little like this. So once there was a little boy called Arcas, who had a pretty mother named Callisto. Everyone liked her, for she was kind and good. Now, just as a by the by, the less PG version of this story is that Arcas is actually the son of Zeus, or Jupiter. We're sticking with the Roman names to avoid confusion here. It's the son of Jupiter, because Jupiter took a bit of a fancy to Callisto and had his wicked way with her. So that's another type of story. Anyway, but here we go. Every day Callisto played with Arcas, telling him stories about the gods in heaven. For the Greeks and the Romans thought there were many gods and goddesses, all with their own places in the sun and in the sea and under the earth and in the storm clouds. But the stories which Arcas liked best were about the goddess of hunting, for he loved to go hunting with his mother. Callisto and Arcas laughed and sang together and were very, very happy. Uh-oh. Whenever Callisto took her little son hunting, friends would join them so they could share their happiness. The sun shone brightly for Callisto, the streams gurgled merrily, the birds sang so loudly that they could be heard by all the gods, in the sea, under the earth, and in the heaven. All the gods enjoyed Callisto's happiness, and they laughed with her. And this made Juno, the queen of the heaven and Jupiter's wife, very jealous, for she liked the gods to think of her as the pretty and pleasant one, and she hated it when they laughed and sang with Callisto. One day Juno did a very wicked thing. She met Callisto by herself, hunting in the woods. Now is my chance, thought Juno. I will change Callisto into an ugly, shaggy bear, and no one will ever think that she is prettier than me. So she waved her hand, and her magic began to work. Poor Callisto. Her lovely white hands became shaggy paws, her pretty pink nose went black, and her lovely long legs turned hairy. She was a bear. Callisto rushed into the darkest part of the wood to hide. She could hear her friends and a little boy calling to her, but she dared not run to them because she was afraid they would think she was a fierce wild bear and would try and shoot her with their bow and arrows. For many years, poor Callisto lived in the woods. She slept in a hollow tree and ate nuts and wild berries. She had to drink water from the stream, which did not seem to gurgle happily at all now. Once the bees gave her honey, and as she ate it, Callisto thought of the happy time she had spent with her son. What has happened to him, she wondered. Arcas had grown up to be a fine youth. He was very fond of hunting and could track animals so quietly that even rabbits with their big ears couldn't hear him. One day he followed the track of a deer across a stream, past a hollow tree, and into the darkest part of the wood. He heard a noise and looked up. In front of him stood a great shaggy bear. The bear was Callisto. Callisto recognized her son at once. She wanted to throw her arms around him, but she knew that he was frightened of her. So she stood still and stared and stared. And Arcas stared back, for he had never seen such a sad bear, but fear drove all thoughts of pity from his mind. He went very pale and raised his bow to fire an arrow at his mother. Just then Jupiter saw what was happening, and he snatched the bow and arrow out of Arcas's hand and changed him into a bear too. Jupiter had always been angry with his wife Juno for turning kind, gentle Callisto into a bear, so to make up for her cruelty, he put Arcas and Callisto together into the sky and made them into stars. Queen Juno was furious when she found out, however, the story continues. When she saw them shining in the heavens, she tried to think of a way of spoiling it for them. So she knew what to do. She went down to see the Sea King, who was her friend, and asked them never to let them enter his palace. And to this day, Callisto and Arcas have never entered the Sea King's palace. If you watch the stars over the sea, you will see that most of them sink behind the horizon, but the great bear and the little bear never set in the sea. They always stay up in the sky. Sailors are glad about this because they find their way by the stars, and they know that the Great Bear is always pointing to one star in the sky which never moves, the pole star. That is the very, very tame and sweet story of these two bears. But I liked it because, as I say, it's one of those ones I remember. I don't know if it was my mum or my dad, but it would have been one of them who had pointed it out to me, and it's the one we kind of first point out to our children, so I thought it kind of warrants a very gentle story to begin with. But I wanted to share some sort of non-traditional stories tonight. So, and I have some really lovely North American native people's stories about these particular stars. So I just wanted to switch this out and show you the Owl Nebula. It's not that one. I'm just going to leave it. Just leave it alone, Helen. There we go. Let me see if I can just make this a little bit smaller. Get it out of the way. There we go. Thanks for bearing with me. So this is taken with our telescopes a while ago by the look of it because of the logo. And I believe it was just shared with me by David. Oh, I didn't write it down. I'm sorry. I think it was David who just shared it with me because I was, I put a call out to the community today to say, oh my God, we've got bad weather in the Canaries because anyone shares some images they have. And this one is a Corco. So this is the Owl Nebula. Just amazing. And so I wanted to share a story that has an owl in it. I thought that would be apt. So, this constellation has a lot of really lovely objects in it. We're going to take a look at the Pinwheel Galaxy in a bit. But there are several, should I say, galaxies of different variations if you're into your Hubble tuning fork. Well worth taking a look. And then, of course, this wonderful open cluster as well. So this story is called The Never-Ending Bear Hunt. This is a very well-known story. It's retold often with regards to sort of Native American stories of this particular constellation. And actually, the book I'm reading, it says it's the Micmac Indians of Nova Scotia that came for this story, but I've heard it told by other peoples. So far away in the sky country, a bear woke up from a long winter sleep. She left her rocky den on the hill and lumbered off to search for berries, and a sharp-eyed chickadee, flitting round the bushes, saw the bear and flew off to call his friends around him. "It's been a long winter and I'm hungry," said Chickadee. "I'm going to go bear hunting. Who will come with me?" It's obviously a very large bird, or a large version of the chickadee. 6 of his friends agreed to join Chickadee, and at once they set out to find the bear. Chickadee was the smallest hunter, but he was also the wisest, and he carried along a pot for boiling his dinner. And some, by the way, say that this pot is Alkaid. Robin, who was larger, was called upon to lead the hunting party. Moosebird was impatient and took his place behind Chickadee. He intended to help himself to Chickadee's pot. Pigeon, Blue Jay, Horned Owl and Saw-Whet all fell in place behind Moosebird as the party started out. So perhaps you can sort of envision these birds right now in the shape of the Big Dipper. Since food had been scarce through the winter, the hunters hurried to track their dinner. They found, though, that large and awkward as she seemed, Bear could move quite fast. The hunters were not catching up with her. All summer the bear moved across the land of the stars, while the hungry hunters followed. As autumn approached, some of them grew too weary to continue. "I'm too far behind to catch up," said Saw-Whet at the very end of the line. He was a clumsy owl and heavier than the others, so Saw-Whet dropped out of the chase. "Where's that lazy Saw-Whet?" fretted Horned Owl, and he left to find his cousin. Blue Jay tried to stay in the hunt, but by and by he and Pigeon lost their way and fell out of sight. That left only Robin, Chickadee with his pot, and Moosebird to follow the trail of the bear. At last, deep into autumn, the hunters overtook their prey. They cornered Bear, reared up on her hind legs, and tried to defend herself. Growling and clawing, she stood, but Robin shot her with his arrow. The bear fell over on her back, her blood colouring the leaves of autumn and staining Robin's breast a brilliant red. All during the winter, the dead bear lay on her back in the sky country, but that was not the end of her story. Her life spirit had entered another bear who had found its way to the den and was fast asleep. When spring awakens the sleeping earth, the den will reappear. A new star bear will come out of the den to search for berries in the sky, and Chickadee will begin the hunt again as he does every year. So I just love this because it's so rich, because it tells the tale of the seasons. And one of, why has this particular group of stars been associated with a bear? We don't really know, but one suggestion is that because of the way it moves around the pole, that the bear, that it sort of seems to be on all fours and then standing up, and there aren't many quadrupeds that can stand up on their hind legs too. So some say that's why it was thought to be a bear. It could just be that the bear was very important for people in the northern hemisphere, sort of certainly higher up. We don't really know, but I wanted to show you this. Here we go. Yeah, so this is kind of, this will show you how the stars of the Big Dipper move around the pole month by month. So you can see that, you know, perhaps at some times of the year, I'm just trying to look at it, you know, it looks like the bear is sort of lying down, and then sometimes it's rearing up perhaps, and then it's sort of on its back. And so you could kind of tell the story of the seasons, and then, you know, you've weaved in these birds as well, that some, you know, are around in spring and then in summer, but then they leave. And with robin and the leaves in autumn being red from the blood. It's a gruesome story, but you can sort of begin to see how maybe this story was formed by people looking up at the stars at night and wanting to tell tales to help them sort of put together what was happening through these seasons, using everything that they were seeing, which was, you know, the animals around them. So I just really love this story. And think it sort of shows well the whole idea of there being like a bear. You know, it's interesting. You know, where did the whole bear thing come from? And it, you know, it's said that I was reading that when there were some missionaries that arrived in North America, and when they pointed out to the peoples that this group of stars was the bear, they were really astonished when the peoples replied and said, "Well, they're actually our bear stars too." Like it was, you know, it wasn't expected that they would share it. So it's kind of, I mean, it's not seen as a bear everywhere, and we'll talk about this in a moment, but certainly a lot of stories around the bear, and it kind of makes more sense to me, it does anyway, to think of it being for north, like high up in North America peoples, because there are a lot of bears around. But even, you know, the Greeks was so intent on this bear story that I remember reading that they even sort of thought about the den, like the northern crown or the corona borealis is thought to be like the den of the bear. And then I think Homer wrote about how this was the actual bear that was lying in wait for Orion. So a lot of association with bear. And, you know, if you start to read up about humans' associations with bears, and you can find out all sorts of sort of prehistoric suggestions of bear cults, and there is I think it's the only prehistoric UNESCO heritage site in Finland. There are, I can't remember, it's 4,500 BCE or years ago. I think it's BCE, but there are some paintings there of that sort of show bear worship, as well as sort of bear sacrifice as well, which is one and the same, aren't they, in a lot of cults. But there are many cults, bear cults around Siberia. So the bear was sort of very much part of like the human story, but it's kind of interesting that these very familiar pattern of stars in the sky became a bear in different parts of the world. And Aristotle, by the way, says that he maintained that it was because of all the animals known to man, the bear was really the only one that could summon up the courage to live in the frozen parts of the far north, because this constellation was always seen as the northern constellation because it, you know, went around the North Pole, I guess. But interestingly, I was hoping to find some stories from like the Arctic that talked about this constellation in terms of being a bear, and how wonderful would that have been to share a story of this being a polar bear, but that was not the case at all. And there have been, there are a lot of things I've read that say that this is a polar bear, and to be honest, I just can't find anything to back that up. I really can't. When you start to read like interviews of people who lived in the Arctic and Eskimos and their elders, not one says that this was a bear. Would have been great. There is actually a bear. The polar bear is thought to be Aldebaran in Taurus, or sometimes one of the Pleiades, surrounded by dogs. So it's almost like Aldebaran surrounded by the Hyades is a polar bear surrounded by dogs, or one of the Pleiades surrounded by the rest of the Pleiades, but not Ursa Major and not the Big Dipper. It is instead rather a caribou. So, there you go. That's sort of typically how it is viewed. Sometimes it has something coming off the back, because you can sort of see here, it's kind of interesting. It doesn't even align with how we see the bear. So this apparently is very popular. It's seen as the caribou, and it's used for like timekeeping in the Arctic, and sort of finding one's bearings, getting one's bearings, which I think was just so fascinating when I started to think about it, like getting one's bearings. Even that has the word bear in it. This whole idea of using the pole star as this navigation. You know, the Greeks used the pole star, used Ursa Major, or the Big Dipper really, in their sailing ships for navigation, but it said the Phoenicians didn't. The Phoenicians used the Little Dipper to get around. But it sort of makes sense, as I mean, it was the pole star for thousands of years. It was in the middle and the Big Dipper points to the North Star, the pole star. So it kind of makes sense that it would have been like this big navigational tool. But even then, when I was reading about the peoples of like the Eskimo peoples, Inuits, were saying that it just didn't really even kind of occur to them. It was more of the stories that they tell are more that they use this as like a guide to how far the night had passed, like we do with really any constellations. So just kind of interesting that it's sort of like the constellation of the north, and yet it's hard to find evidence of anyone really in the north seeing this as a bear. It's sort of a bear elsewhere. So there was another story I wanted to share. This one's a short one. So maybe I'll have a look at the Pinwheel Galaxy and have this short story. There we go. Beautiful. Look what you could have won tonight. This is from David as well, and I'm always really grateful when members share their photos. So I feel very bad that I'm not certain of his last name. So, but let me share this other story with you. And it's just a short one. So the story takes place in a forest of oak trees, and the trees in the forest are not fixed to their places. So every night after midnight, the oaks move around and they visit one another. And one day, a bear loses his way in the forest because the trees are moving around everywhere. And that night, at the stroke of midnight, when the trees started to wander again, the bear becomes even more lost and can't find its way out at all. And it's just not used to like wandering among these wandering trees. So it couldn't help but collide with them. Now, one of these proud oaks took umbrage when the bear did not apologize for colliding with him. And so, indignant at this impoliteness, the oak begins to chase the bear. And seeing that matters were not really in his favor, the bear starts to run as fast as he can. So in the depth of night, this like fantastic marathon kind of takes place. But the tree is just not quite quick enough to catch the bear. And this chase goes on until dawn is almost near, at which time the tree is supposed to go back to its own place, or the sun god will notice its absence. Furious that it has not been able to catch the bear, the tree makes the last effort, reaching for the bear with all its might. By stretching its longest branches, it just manages to grab hold of the bear's tail, and with a ferocious swing, the tree tosses the bear into the skies. And the bear soared all the way to the dome of heaven, where it can now be seen as the Great Bear. So there's another, in the story of Callisto earlier, it said that Jupiter throws the bears with such force into the sky. He doesn't gently place them like he did in our very PG story. He lobs them there, and that's what causes the bear's tail to stretch. And it seems a similar thing here with the mad, unforgiving oak. Flings the bear upwards, and there he sort of stretches his tail. As I mentioned earlier, there's this artistic license of how this bear got this really long tail in the sky. And was it even a bear? Some the Ojibwe peoples, this is actually Fisher. Very, very well-known constellation. The Fisher is like a foxy, ottery type thing. And it's thought that maybe before it was a bear, in around sort of the region of Greece, that maybe it was something else. And some people say it was a bear. Acadia said that the people in Acadia said that they came from bears. The bears came down from the sky and gave birth to them. So it's really super interesting. And there's some really fascinating symbolism actually around the bears. So for example, it's some people have, this is just interpretation, but have said that the pole star has always been recognized as truth because it's unchanging. The one that does not move. And so you have these two bears going round it, and it's said that the large bear represents our intellect. It's very strong, and we need this reasoning because the reasoning acts as a pointer to the pole star. However, it is this smaller, childlike part of ourselves that is required to actually touch truth, because the little bear, obviously Polaris, is in its tail, so it does actually touch this place of truth. So some people have interpreted that obviously as this notion that knowledge and reasoning is useful to get you to a place where then you have to accept, sort of let go of everything you know in order to find truth, which is really beautiful when you think about it. So yeah. I mentioned I wanted to talk just a bit about the Big Dipper and the wagon and the plow. So in England it's known as the plow, or the Big Dipper and the wagon, but it's kind of known all over, and even in Greece and Rome it was called this, the asterism was known as the plow. The wagon. In France it was called the Great Chariot, and was actually on some Gaulish coins. The Danes, the Goths, the Swedes, it was a great wagon. The Poles, it was the heavenly wain, and wain means wagon. In early England, it was called, really the Welsh called it Arthur's wain, or then England called it Charlemagne's wain, which was then shortened to Charles's wain. And even today, this, maybe if you're over a certain age or you live in a rural area, you might call it this. I never called it this, but it's called sometimes known as Charles Wain. And there's this poem by Tennyson where it says, "We danced about the maypole and in the hazel copse till Charles Wain came out above us, the tall and above the tall white chimney tops," which is very sweet. But yes, so what was interesting to me about this was that sometimes it's seen as the wagon of Boetes, or more specifically Arcturus, the star in Boetes, that this is the wagon being pushed by him. So when we talk about the constellation Boetes, I guess we'll revisit that. So Arthur's wain was seen as, Arcturus was seen as King Arthur, as representing King Arthur. And even I think the word Arthur comes some relation to the bear. So, and some people said that it could relate to King Arthur's round table because the bear goes round the pole, that maybe the round table was the circle in which the middle sat truth, which I thought was, really lovely. And kind of interesting, because if you think about it as like a clock, there were sometimes 12 nights of the round table, so it kind of makes sense, these 12 months perhaps, I don't know, but often there are also 14 nights of the round table, so it could be the 7 stars of the Great Bear and the 7 stars of more of the asterisms, of the Big Dipper and the Little Dipper. Who knows, but it's really, really fascinating. But let me see, I have got one more story, but I'm not sure we're gonna have time for it tonight. Well, we might do, will we? I don't know, we'll see. We might have time at the end, but I did not want to talk about Ursa Major without mentioning its future. So let's have a look. We can just, there we go. Let me just make these a little bit smaller, if I can. Right. So do you remember at the beginning I talked about Dubhe and Alkaid at the end not being part of the same star system as the 5 stars in the middle? Well, they're actually moving in a different direction. So, and I've seen different types of images of this, but this is roughly it. So it didn't always look the way it does to us today, and it's not going to in the future. So it's kind of interesting, I thought, to see how it's changed over time and what it's going to end up being. And you might say, well, it's not so different, is it? But in the end, well, one, you can say, well, it won't point to the pole star. But then when you remember that the pole star is, it's changing over time because of precession. So actually this particular asterism won't be as important probably to people as maybe as it now is, because it will no longer point to the pole star. But I thought this was just fascinating, and I wasn't aware of this. I wasn't aware that they were not fixed together and that they're actually kind of breaking apart and sort of moving all over the place. I mean, that one in 50,000 AD, this is a really old book, I got this from, by the way. It looks more like you could then start to say, it's not really a wagon. Is it going to be a bear? It's more like a serpent. I don't know. So it could entirely change for people down the line what they call this constellation. And of course, what people called it back in 50,000 BCE, it might have been different, conjured up a different idea rather than a bear back then. So just really fascinating. But then, and just to sort of show you, if you're not aware about the poles, so you can see here, sort of Polaris, it's not far off the present pole, but Vega will be the next one, and it was Thuban in Draco, and then before it over the pole was over near Cepheus beforehand. So really interesting actually to think about the future of this particular group of stars and its relevance to future people. I mean, we just can't even imagine it because it's just part of all of our culture. So yeah, I wanted to share that. I don't know if we're gonna have time for this story. I might have to just put it online. It's I might put the link up in their room. It's a sweet story. It's a totally different though, and it has nothing to do with bears, and it's a Chian legend about a girl and her 7 brothers and how they end up in the sky in this particular asterism. It was shared by one of our members, so I'm sad not to share it, but it was quite long, so we'll probably just save that. And hopefully when I come back, we might still have time to capture Ursa Major again with telescopes, maybe go into more of the unusual objects. I kind of played it a bit safe this time with just picking the crowd pleasers with the Pinwheel Galaxy and the Owl Nebula, although we didn't get to see them with our own eyes. But so to end, I thought I would just share with you a little bit of a poem. Let's have a look. Let's see. Where did I put it? That's the problem. Okay. Right. And to share this, I thought I would just put this really adorable picture up. Look at this. Look at this. I love this. And what I just love about this constellation is just how we teach our children this constellation and the stories we use, and we could all make up our own. But it's such an important way to initially connect with the sky at night, and sort of begin to work our way around the sky. Normally this is like the first one we learn, and then we find everything else by just sort of coming off of Ursa Major, or find our way to Orion and do the same there. So it's just really sweet. And what I love, there's it's a Dutch nursery rhyme, and it's been translated. I'm just going to share it with you, and it's for when you go to bed. So that was perfect. As we're ending tonight, we'll just end with this lovely little nursery rhyme, and it talks about the 14 stars of the Big Dipper and the Little Dipper, that they are indeed guardian angels looking over us as we go to sleep, in particular looking over children as they lie in their bed. At night, when I lay myself to rest, 14 angels for me do their best. 2 by my right hand, 2 by my left hand, 2 at my head end, 2 at my feet end, 2 who will cover me, 2 who will awaken me, and 2 who will show me to heaven's paradise. I just thought it was so sweet. So I'm happy to end it there. So there is so much we could talk about with Ursa Major, and I know that there's tons I didn't touch on tonight. I'm traveling for a bit and have been for a while, which is why unfortunately I haven't been able to do this on a regular weekly basis, but I'm hoping that will all end in May, and we'll be able to sort of gather more than just once a month. But if Ursa Major is still visible when I return at the end of April, then we might just do a shorter show, and we'll capture some of the many other stories about this group of stars. But otherwise, yes, I'll post when the next one will be. I'm thinking it will be the end of April, but I certainly always post in Twitter, and I post in the community board. And if you have any requests, because I'm not set for a few weeks, feel free to email me or message me on the board and give me some, let me know what you would like to take a look at. And apologies again, I didn't get to share this Cheyenne story with you, but I may condense it and put it up as a post in Illuminations. That way, as people can enjoy it. So that's it. I know that I don't know if Dr. Paige is. Oh, I think she's finished her series now. But Paul is back next weekend with his practical astronomy, so that'll be there. And then I say I'll be back at the end of April, and then hopefully be here regularly. For some bizarre reason, I've been travelling every Sunday night. It's strange, but hopefully that all ends in the beginning of May, and then we'll get back into the thick of it. But in the meantime, just leave you with this really adorable picture. It's on a card, and I hope that these 14 stars look over you this evening as you sleep. And I will see you in the next couple of weeks. In the meantime, I wish you clear skies. Good night.